Millions of people fell in love with her as the sweet, gator-wrestling tomboy from the Ozarks. But almost none of them ever knew that the woman playing that role wasn't really acting at all. She had already lived it, years before Hollywood ever found her. And the real story of how she got that role, what 9 seasons of fame quietly cost her, and how she chose to spend the decades after the cameras stopped rolling is far more remarkable than anything that ever aired on television. Today we're telling the real story of Donna Douglas, the woman the world came to know as Elly May Clampett. Stay with me, because what happened to her after Hollywood moved on is the part almost nobody talks about, and it says more about who she truly was than 9 years of primetime television ever could. Long before the world knew the name Donna Douglas, she was a little girl named Doris Smith, born on September 26, 1932 in a small rural community called Pride just outside Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Her family did not have much money. They lived a modest, working life on land that demanded real physical labor from everyone in the household, and young Doris grew up doing exactly that kind of labor herself, right alongside her older brother. There was very little room in that household for the kind of childhood people usually imagine when they picture a future Hollywood star. There were no dance recitals. There were no tea parties. Instead, there were cows to milk before school, chores that never seemed to end, and long afternoons spent fishing and hunting alongside the boys in her family, because in her world, that was simply what childhood looked like. She would later describe those early years as full of adventure rather than deprivation, and in many ways that attitude defined her entire life. She wasn't a girl who resented what she didn't have. She was a girl who made the absolute most of exactly what she did have. And what she had was open land, animals, and freedom most children in America's growing suburbs could barely imagine. She attended St. Gerard Catholic High School near Baton Rouge, where she played both basketball and softball, and was remembered as unusually athletic, unusually strong, and unusually unbothered by the fact that most girls her age were far more interested in looking pretty than in outrunning the boys on the playing field. That contradiction, a naturally striking beauty who genuinely preferred the outdoors, mud, and animals to a mirror, would end up being the exact quality that made her famous a decade later, though nobody, least of all Doris herself, could have predicted it at the time. What almost nobody realizes about the woman who would become Elly May Clampett is that by the time she reached her late teens, life had already handed her one of its harder lessons. At just 17 years old, in 1949, she married a young man named Roland Bourgeois Jr. The marriage did not last. It ended within a matter of years, but not before it gave her the one thing she would treasure above everything else for the rest of her life, her only child, a son named Danny, born in 1954. She was now a young, divorced single mother in rural Louisiana in the early 1950s, a situation that carried far more social stigma at the time than it would today, and it meant that whatever ambitions she had for the future, she would be chasing them while also raising a child essentially on her own. As a teenager and young woman, Doris discovered pageants almost by accident, and it turned out she had a genuine gift for them. She won the title of Miss Baton Rouge in 1957 and went on to become first runner-up for Miss New Orleans that same year. For most young women, that would have been the highlight of an already full story. For Doris Smith, it was the opening of a door she hadn't even known existed. Something about standing under those lights, in front of an audience that had no idea where she came from or what she'd already been through, made her realize she wanted more out of life than the small rural world she'd grown up in. So she made a decision that for a young single mother from Pride, Louisiana in the late 1950s was genuinely daring. She decided to go to New York to try to build a career in entertainment. There was just one small problem. She had never once set foot on an airplane in her entire life. She got on that plane anyway. Her first attempts to break into the industry were modest and, by her own account, occasionally frustrating. She briefly worked as a print model for toothpaste advertisements, but quickly realized that the modeling world with its constant pressure around weight and appearance wasn't a life she actually wanted for herself. Television, on the other hand, felt entirely different. In 1957, she made her first appearance on the small screen as the Letters girl on The Perry Como Show, and something about her natural, unfiltered charm translated instantly through the camera in a way that couldn't be taught in any acting class. It wasn't long before she was showing up regularly on The Steve Allen Show and The Phil Silvers Show, and New York photographers eventually crowned her with the title Miss Byline, a title she proudly wore during appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show, one of the single most influential platforms in all of American entertainment at that time. By 1959, she had landed a featured role in the film Career alongside Dean Martin and Shirley MacLaine, and a memorable spot in the popular toe-tapping musical Lil Abner. In 1961, she played Tony Randall's secretary in the romantic comedy Lover Come Back, sharing the screen with the massive star power of Rock Hudson and Doris Day, one of the biggest on-screen pairings of the era. She also appeared in a haunting, now legendary episode of The Twilight Zone in 1960 titled The Eye of the Beholder, in which she played a woman undergoing a mysterious medical procedure, her face entirely wrapped in bandages for nearly the entire episode, building toward one of the most talked-about twist endings in the history of the series. A role that required real dramatic restraint since her voice and body language had to carry almost the entire performance. Then, in 1966, came the moment that, on paper, should have marked the true peak of her entire film career. She was cast opposite Elvis Presley himself in the musical Frankie and Johnny, playing the title role of Frankie, a riverboat entertainer caught in a tangled love triangle with Presley's character, a riverboat gambler and singer. It was her only true leading role on the big screen, and the timing could not have seemed more promising, coming right at the height of Presley's box office drawing power. And here is where the story gets genuinely interesting, because what actually happened between Donna Douglas and Elvis Presley during that production depends entirely on who you ask. For years, rumors circulated within Hollywood circles that Douglas had quietly fallen for Presley during filming and grew despondent as she came to realize the king of rock and roll would never return her feelings in any meaningful way. But those who knew her personally at the time told a strikingly different story. Family friends who spent time with her during that period recalled her privately confiding that she actually didn't care for him very much at all. Whatever the real truth behind that particular chapter was, one thing is beyond dispute. Frankie and Johnny premiered in her home state in Baton Rouge in 1966, drew mostly positive reviews and respectable but unspectacular box office, and did not launch her into the bigger film career everyone around her had assumed it would. It would remain the only true starring film role of her entire career, but television was about to hand her something far bigger than any single movie ever could. In 1962, producers were casting a new CBS comedy about a poor mountain family who strike oil and suddenly find themselves relocating to Beverly Hills, and they needed to find the perfect young woman to play Elly May Clampett, the family's tomboyish, animal-loving daughter. Over 500 women auditioned for the part. Most of them were talented, trained actresses doing their absolute best impression of a country girl. Donna Douglas didn't have to do an impression of anything. During the audition process, candidates were famously asked to demonstrate the character by milking a goat directly in front of the casting team, a task that reduced plenty of polished professional actresses to nervous laughter and awkward fumbling in front of the very people deciding their future. Donna Douglas walked right up to that goat like she had done it every single day of her life, because in a way she had, just with cows instead. She later explained, with the same characteristic simplicity that defined her entire personality, that she figured a goat and a cow worked about the same way, so she just went ahead and did it. She got the part. And Elly May Clampett would go on to become one of the most beloved characters in the entire history of American television. The Beverly Hillbillies premiered in the fall of 1962 and became an almost immediate cultural phenomenon, at one point capturing an astonishing 50% share of the entire television viewing audience in America, a number that seems almost impossible to comprehend by today's fragmented media standards. There was, however, a detail about Donna Douglas's personal life that CBS chose to keep entirely hidden from the public during those crucial early months. The network reportedly withheld the fact that their new leading lady was a divorced single mother, worried that the information might clash with the wholesome, all-American image they were trying to sell to living rooms across the country. It was only once the show had firmly established itself as a genuine ratings powerhouse that this detail quietly became public knowledge, by which point audiences were already far too in love with Elly May to care. Donna Douglas, playing the sweet, strong, endlessly good-natured Elly May, became the show's most photographed and most fan-mailed star, appearing on the cover of TV Guide 9 separate times during the show's run, more than any of her castmates managed to achieve. She traveled internationally representing the series and reportedly insisted on personally answering as much of her enormous volume of fan mail as she possibly could, a level of genuine, hands-on engagement that many stars of her stature simply didn't bother extending to their audience. What made Elly May resonate so deeply with viewers wasn't just her striking beauty, though she was undeniably one of the most photographed women in America during that era. It was her complete lack of pretension. She could haul hay bales without breaking a sweat, handle wild animals without flinching, wrestle alligators for laughs, and somehow remain the single most innocent, good-hearted character on the entire show, constantly baffled by the snobbery and superficiality of her new Beverly Hills neighbors. Audiences didn't just find her funny, they found her genuinely comforting, a weekly reminder that decency and simplicity could survive contact with sudden wealth and status without being corrupted by either. In many ways, Donna Douglas wasn't performing that quality for the cameras at all. She was simply being herself, and audiences could feel the difference every single week. There was one particular detail about her time on set that reveals just how deeply she took her personal values seriously, even when doing so worked directly against her own financial interests. Her castmates appeared in television commercials for Winston Cigarettes, one of the show's major sponsors at the time, cashing in on their newfound popularity the way most working actors of that era would have done without a second thought. Donna Douglas, a devout Christian who did not smoke and did not believe in promoting the habit to a national audience, flatly refused to appear in those advertisements. Instead, for the very same sponsor package, she pitched Kellogg's Corn Flakes, quietly declining an easy paycheck because it conflicted with who she actually was underneath the fame. It was a small decision, largely forgotten by history today, but it foreshadowed exactly the kind of choices she would keep making for the rest of her life, long after the cameras finally stopped rolling on Beverly Hills. Her closest relationship on set turned out to be with the man who played her television father, Buddy Ebsen, who portrayed the patriarch Jed Clampett. Their friendship lasted an extraordinary 32 years, well beyond the life of the show itself. She once described Ebsen in an interview as very much like her own real father, a quiet, reserved, and deeply caring man, a comparison that meant a great deal coming from a woman who had grown up without a particularly present father figure of her own. When Ebsen passed away in 2003, the very same year Douglas lost her own mother, those closest to her said the double loss affected her profoundly, and years later she revealed in an interview just how deep her feelings of respect and genuine affection for him had actually run throughout those 3 decades of friendship. The Beverly Hillbillies ran for 9 full seasons before CBS finally canceled it in 1971, as part of a broader network purge of rural-themed comedies that television executives had started to consider hopelessly old-fashioned in the face of shifting cultural tastes. And this is where Donna Douglas's story takes a turn that anyone familiar with the history of iconic television characters will instantly recognize. She had become one of the most famous and most photographed faces in all of America. And almost overnight, that very fame became the thing trapping her. Typecasting is a word that gets thrown around loosely in entertainment circles, but for Donna Douglas it was a very real and very painful professional reality. Producers and casting directors saw her walk into a room and saw only one thing: Elly May Clampett. They simply could not picture her as anything else, no matter how hard she tried to demonstrate her range in auditions. Making matters even more difficult, her deeply held Christian beliefs meant she was unwilling to pursue the increasingly mature and risque film roles that Hollywood was steadily shifting toward throughout the 1970s, a direction the industry was moving in almost universally at the time. She took what roles she could find in the years following the show's cancellation, appearing in episodes of shows like Night Gallery and Adam 12, and even reprising her most famous role for the 1981 television movie The Return of the Beverly Hillbillies. But nothing ever came close to matching the cultural footprint of the character that had made her a household name in the first place. On top of the typecasting, she became entangled in a prolonged and exhausting legal dispute over the commercial use of her own likeness in Beverly Hillbillies merchandise, a battle that consumed years of energy and legal resources without ever fully resolving in the way she had hoped it would. By 1980, the same year her second marriage quietly ended, Donna Douglas had effectively stepped away from acting altogether. For most Hollywood stories, this is the exact point where the narrative turns sad, where a formerly famous face fades quietly and bitterly into obscurity, watching from the sidelines as an industry that once adored her simply moves on without a backward glance. Donna Douglas's story does something almost nobody expects. Instead of fading, she simply redirected all of that energy toward the things she had genuinely cared about all along, long before Hollywood had ever found her sitting on a farm in Pride, Louisiana. Now, if you're finding this story as fascinating as we did putting it together, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. We tell stories just like this one every week, the real lives behind some of the most beloved faces in classic television and film history. Her Christian faith, which had already quietly shaped decisions like the cigarette commercial she turned down years earlier, became the true center of her post-fame life. She became a gospel singer, eventually releasing 4 full Christian albums over the following decades. Music she recorded not to chase some new form of stardom, but because she genuinely wanted to use the same voice that had charmed millions of television viewers to bring comfort to people going through hard times in their own lives. She never became a major recording star in gospel music, and by every account from people who knew her, she never once wanted to be. She simply wanted her songs to reach the specific people who needed to hear them. In a decision that surprised almost everyone who thought they had her figured out, Donna Douglas also built a genuinely successful second career in real estate, primarily around the Baton Rouge area of Louisiana, using the earnings from her acting career to invest wisely and consistently in property over the years. She became a fully licensed real estate agent and by all accounts developed a sharp, disciplined eye for property values. A skill set that had absolutely nothing to do with acting talent and everything to do with the same practical, no-nonsense character she had grown up with on that working farm decades earlier. Perhaps the single most striking chapter of her post-Hollywood life came in 1982, when Donna Douglas, already 50 years old and long past the absolute peak of her fame, enrolled at the Rhema Bible Training Center in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. She spent 2 full years there, studying children's ministry with the same discipline she had once brought to a network audition, and graduated in 1984 with a specific focus on working with young people. This was not a publicity move dressed up as spirituality. There was no film premiere or magazine cover waiting for her on the other side of that degree. It was, by every account from people who actually knew her, a genuine calling she felt personally compelled to answer. She went on to speak at churches, community events, and gatherings across the country for years afterward, sharing not stories of Hollywood glamour and red carpets, but stories of faith, humility, and the values that had shaped her long before anyone in America knew her name. She wrote 2 children's books rooted in her Christian beliefs, Donna's Critters and Kids and Miss Donna's Mulberry Acres Farm, and even published a cookbook late in life blending her Southern Louisiana roots with her Hollywood years, titled Southern Favorites with a Taste of Hollywood. Her personal life, unlike so many of her famous contemporaries from that same golden era, remained remarkably free of scandal for the rest of her days. After her first brief marriage to Roland Bourgeois Jr., as a teenager, which had produced her only child, her son Danny, Douglas married again in 1971, this time to Robert the 1000th. Leeds, the director who had personally helmed several episodes of the Beverly Hillbillies during its long run. That marriage lasted until 1980, ending in a quiet, uneventful divorce without the kind of tabloid drama that consumed so many of her fellow celebrities during that same period. She never remarried after that second marriage ended. For decades afterward, Donna Douglas lived a life that most former A-list television stars simply don't choose for themselves. She avoided the paparazzi circuit almost entirely. She made occasional, genuinely warm appearances at fan conventions celebrating the Beverly Hillbillies, always happy to sit and talk with the fans who still adored Elly May decades later. But she never chased the spotlight the way so many of her peers continued to once their own fame began to fade with time. When asked in a 2003 interview how she truly felt about the role that had come to define her entire public life, she said something that revealed exactly how she had made peace with the very typecasting that had once frustrated her professionally for years. She said Elly May had been like a door opener for her, a role people genuinely loved, and that even though a role like that could certainly open doors, it was substance and integrity that actually carried a person through them once they were open. It was a strikingly humble way for anyone to describe the single character that had made them a household name across an entire nation. In 2014, Donna Douglas received a diagnosis that would ultimately change everything: pancreatic cancer, a disease notorious throughout the medical world for its stealth and its aggression, frequently going undetected until it has already advanced significantly beyond the point of easy treatment. She fought it with the same quiet, stubborn determination that had defined her entire life, largely out of the public eye, surrounded by her family in the small Baton Rouge suburb of Zachary, Louisiana, the very same state she had left decades earlier as a young single mother who had never even been on an airplane before. Her son, Danny Bourgeois, stood by her side throughout the entire ordeal, along with her brother, Emmett R. Smith, Jr. Her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren, a full family unit gathered around the woman who had spent her whole life prioritizing exactly that kind of connection. On January 1, 2015, Donna Douglas passed away peacefully in her own home. She was 82 years old. The news reached fans across the entire country almost instantly, and tributes poured in from people who had grown up watching her on Friday nights decades earlier, many of them born long after the original broadcast had already ended because the Beverly Hillbillies never really left television at all. It aired in continuous syndication for decades after its original run, meaning generation after generation of brand new viewers kept discovering Elly May Clampett long after Donna Douglas herself had quietly walked away from Hollywood entirely. People who worked with her, who knew her personally away from the character that made her famous, consistently described the exact same thing: a genuinely sweet, unpretentious woman who seemed remarkably similar to the character that had made her a household name, not because she was performing that persona for anyone watching, but because in many real ways she had simply never stopped being the girl from Pride, Louisiana who grew up milking cows and swinging from vines with her brother and cousins. What makes Donna Douglas's story stand apart from so many other classic Hollywood biographies isn't tragedy and it isn't scandal. It's almost the exact opposite of both. It's the story of a woman who became famous almost entirely by accident, who watched that very fame nearly trap her creatively for the rest of her professional life, and who responded to that trap not with bitterness or resentment, but by quietly and deliberately building an entirely new life around faith, family, and genuine service to others, all without needing a single camera to be pointed at her while she did it. She wasn't chasing a comeback, she wasn't fighting to reclaim relevance the way so many former stars of her era spent their later decades doing. She had already decided, long before Hollywood ever discovered her sitting on that farm, exactly what kind of person she wanted to be. And fame, for all its power, never actually managed to change that. Now here's what I genuinely want to know from you. Donna Douglas walked away from Hollywood at the height of her fame and never once looked back with any real regret. Do you think more stars from that same golden era should have made that exact same choice? Or is there something equally admirable about the ones who kept fighting to stay relevant no matter what it cost them personally? Let me know exactly what you think in the comments. Subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.